So you've come up with a story. You've captured all the images that you need for that, and now you're sitting in front of your computer trying to figure out how to put all these pieces together so you'll end up with the film that you envisioned in the first place. This is quite a common scenario that a lot of filmmakers, not just underwater filmmakers, come across when they get into the editing process. In today's video, I want to share with you my 10-step editing process, which will hopefully give you a bit of a guideline and help you in your next editing project. Coming up. Hey there underwater filmmakers, welcome back to the channel. It's great to see all you smiling faces again. As mentioned in last week's video where we talked about the storytelling process in general, in today's video I want to talk to you about the editing process and share with you my 10-step editing process that I always go through when editing not just underwater films but any films really in general. Before we get into that, I do want to give a shout out to our newest member of the YouTube channel. Rodrigo just signed up to the membership a few days ago. Welcome to the family, Rodrigo. It's great to have you and thank you so much for your support. Rodrigo has also submitted a film to be reviewed within the Reviewing Your Underwater Films series, which as a channel member, this film will be prioritized and you will be able to see the review of Rodrigo's film this coming Thursday here on the channel. If you want to have a sneak peek at Rodrigo's content on his YouTube channel, I'll put a link down in the video description below so you can go over there and have a look at what other content Rodrigo is creating. If you want to become a family member and a member of this channel as well, click on the button just below this video which says become a member. This will take you to the welcome page of the membership area and will give you all the information about the different membership options. Now, becoming a member doesn't only mean that you're going to be getting some really cool benefits that are not available to non-members, but it also means that your financial contribution is going to help this channel immensely in developing, and it's going to help me keep creating all the content that I put out for free here on the channel. So thank you very much for everyone who decides to make a contribution that way and help out the channel. And now, let's jump onto the computer and have a look at that 10-step editing process. So welcome to my computer and Final Cut Pro X, which is my preferred editing software. But don't worry, if you're using another software, that's perfectly fine because we're not going to be going into the technicalities of how to actually execute such an edit, but we're going to be going more into a general direction and looking at the 10 steps that I always go through whenever I edit a film, not specifically just underwater, but any film really in general. So this is can maybe be like a little guideline for you as well to go through all these points when you edit your next underwater film or general film. As an example to work through that 10-step editing process, I've pulled up my the edit of my winning film at the Swiss Underwater Videography Championship the first time. This is going to be just for us as an example, and I'll use this edit to show you all the different steps that I go through when going through a proper complete editing process. So after you've imported all the footage and all the media that you want to use for that project, the very first step I recommend you always do is go through all your footage and mark your favorites. And I would really not recommend to skip this step. It does take some extra time right here at the beginning, I agree, but it's going to make your life so much easier later on in the following steps when it actually when we get to putting together your actual sequence. So the way I go through this or make this selection is by going through literally every single clip. You don't have to play through it, you can skim through it as well. You're hopefully going to remember what each clip is about, unless it has been a long time since you've recorded these clips, and then you just mark the parts of the clip that you want to mark as a favorite part that you can see yourself using in your final edit. Now, the criteria for me to choose or pick a section that I want to use for my final selection or my final clip is whether or not the subject is in focus, whether or not the clip itself is too shaky or stable enough better. I want to make sure that it's well exposed, so it's not too dark, it's not too bright. I also want to make sure that the composition is okay, so the subject is where it needs to be. That's kind of the main criteria for me when it comes to selecting the imagery. Also, you can think about whether or not the clip itself fits within the story that you want to tell. And also, I try to just select the clips that have a certain action in them, because oftentimes, especially when filming marine life, you will end up just waiting for a fish or an animal to do something. So you'll end up with a lot of footage of that fish or that animal not doing much, and that can kind of be deselected. So you don't really need to have that in your favorite selection, in my opinion, and that's just going to make it easier for you to go through the footage, and it's going to make the available or the selected footage that you're going to be working with in the final edit that much less and easier to work through. So as you can see here in Final Cut, once you've marked a selection or a section, I better say, of the clip as your favorite part, it's going to be marked with that green little line up on top there. And then you see that I've marked several clips here that I find that I decided they qualify for my favorites, and I want to use them in the final clip. And once I've done that, I can then just choose all my favorites, and I've got just a selection of all my favorite clips here. So I know that these are the clips that I want to be working with in my final edit. Now, step number 2 is fairly simple, by basically just selecting all the clips that you have in your favorites. And now what I personally do, I drop them all together at the same time down into my timeline. Now, this is obviously already the finished timeline, so I'm not going to be doing this now, but normally I would just bring them all down in the timeline, and then I'd have all my pre-selected favorite clips in the timeline. Step number 3 would then be to go through those clips and put them into the appropriate order. Remember last week when we talked about the storytelling part, and if you haven't seen that video about storytelling, I highly recommend you stop this video right here, go and watch the storytelling part. There's going to be a link to that video up in the right top corner. You can watch that right now, get an idea about the storytelling section, and then come back and finish watching this video here. So, as we mentioned last week in that video, we have 3 parts in our story. We have a beginning, we have a middle section, a middle part, main part, and we have an ending. And now in this step number 3, what we want to do is bring our footage, our individual clips, in that specific order. So all the clips that have to do with our beginning, like for example here our diver sitting on the rocks, and like a close-up of that diver here as well. This is clear that this is going to be at the beginning, so I'll bring these clips right to the beginning, and then I have my other clips underwater, and I put them into the appropriate order that I want to have them in. Normally I just put all my beginning clips or my starting clips to the very beginning of the timeline, and normally I also know which one is going to be my ending clip, so I put that at the end of the clip, and then start just shuffling around the different clips in between the middle section clips until I'm happy with the sequencing. Once you've put your clips in a rough order, and they really just only have to be a rough order, it doesn't have to be completely 100% exact, you can still shuffle them around later on as we're doing the fine tuning, but once you've got them in that rough order, I would then suggest to go and pick out a music track that you want to use for this clip, because now seeing your storyline kind of envisioned in the images that are laid down on your timeline, you should get an idea also for the mood that the film, or a better idea for the mood that the film will be in. So it's going to be easier for you to pick out the music track that way, rather than going and picking one out right at the beginning before you've even looked at the footage and put it down in a rough sequencing in your timeline. Now, when it comes to picking out a song, I normally go to my favorite site for this, which is audio.com. I find that they have a really cool selection of music. It's quite easy to go through all the different selections and find a music track that is fitting to the project that you're working on. And they've got some really cool plans. Yes, it's not a free website, so it's not royalty-free music. You will have to pay for that, but it's they've got different models that you can choose from. They've got a sort of a lifetime subscription, which costs about $250, I think, and will give you lifetime access to all their libraries and all their music that they have, and is going to cover you license-wise for anything on YouTube and social media and all that sort of stuff. If you're doing any commercial work and you want to use the music as on commercial project, then you're better off going with the Pro plan, which is a annual subscription, and you have to pay every year, but you'll get extra coverage in licensing for that extra money that you're paying, so you can use it on literally any commercial project that you wanna produce. Right now, audio.com has a really good special offer for their professional subscription, their annual subscription. You can get more than 70% off. Normally, that would cost you $199 per year. Right now, you can get it for $59 for the first year. I'll leave a link down to the audio website down in the video description below. Feel free to go and check that out. And if you decide to get a subscription at audio, I would appreciate if you use the link down in the video description below. It's an affiliate link. It's gonna give me a little kickback on your purchase at audio.com at no extra cost to you. So thank you very much if you're considering that. Alright, let's get back to the editing process. So once you've picked your music, you've imported it to the project, you placed it into your timeline, you can then start editing the actual clips to the music. Normally I recommend editing to the music, so you're cutting to the beat of the music, which is going to make your whole piece a little more, it's just going to make it look nicer and feel nicer if you do that, in my opinion. Also, in this fifth step of editing to the music and editing basically your clips, you will also do your color corrections, your white balance adjustments, your color corrections, your color grading, your stabilizing of the clips, cropping, framing your clips if you have to. All that sort of stuff is done in this fifth step, and that's why I said this is kind of your most time-intensive step in the whole process. While you're doing this, it's more likely than not that the piece of music that you've picked is not going to be the exact length that you guys want it to be. There is actually a really easy way how you can make any piece of music to the desired length with Adobe Audition. If you have the Adobe suite, you also have Adobe Audition, and within that software you can extend or shorten any music track very, very easily. There's a separate video that I've created a while back. I'll link it up in the top right corner here for you. So if that's of interest to you, go and check that out. It's a step-by-step explanation how you can create or make any music clip longer or shorter depending on your needs. So before we get to step number 6, let's talk a little bit more about the actual sequencing and how to decide where to put which clip. Now, as we said before, we have a beginning, which is fairly clear. There's not much discussion what needs to be there. And we have an ending, which also is quite clear what's going to be shown towards the end. But in the middle part, that's where most people have difficulties deciding how to structure their videos. And this is where proper preparation is so important, because if you think about your storyline and what you wanna tell in your film before you get in the water, you'll be able to get better shots that will be much easier combined and put next to each other in the editing process. So in my case here, for example, these shots here, the entry shots, like well, this one I might have taken anyways, but this one here and this shot here, these shots, I don't think I would have taken them if I didn't know what I was going to tell, what I was going to try to tell with the story in the beginning. So I knew there's going to be a diver as my main protagonist in the story, and I wanted to introduce him into the story. And this is how I introduce my main protagonist into the story, by him swimming into the frame, swimming over some seagrass areas and showing some of the seagrass from a POV perspective. And then we get into some other underwater scenes, and these are not really spectacular. I mean, all of these shots, look at them, they're nothing special. Like, there's no real skill in getting these shots taken. It's just thinking about getting these shots and making sure that you do end up getting these shots. And this is all in the pre-production or the preparation for your shoot. But executing these shots is not very difficult. They're fairly simple shots, but it's important also that if you have a shot, for example, like this one, of all the shellfish there, the whole seabed is full of them, to also capture a close-up shot. Try always to capture more of these different varieties of shots, and then in your edit you can go from like showing an entire field of these shellfish to just a close-up of the shellfish, and giving the audience a much more intimate look into the organism that you're showing. Or you can go vice versa. You can show first the close-up shot and then go into a wide-angle shot. That's kind of a bit to personal taste, but make sure you have both and you show both one after the other, so the audience can make the connection between, okay, this is the whole seabed full of these shellfish, and this is what they look if we look at them close up. And then we go into some more not very interesting shots, really, in my opinion, or not very exclusive shots, before we then get to the main part, if you want to put it this way. This is where we meet our other main protagonist, the crayfish, the freshwater lobsters. And obviously, these shots are not taken, or no, it's not all the same freshwater lobster, or not all the same crayfish that we see here. These are different individuals, just trying to put them together in kind of a sequence. So we'll look at him from like a further distance, we get a little closer, different angle, we get really close, want to get a really proper look at him, and then we have another couple of shots of him going through the seagrass there. We look at some other individuals there, and this is basically just putting different shots of that crayfish together. But the important part here is that this would have not been possible if I had not gotten, 24 shots of crayfish from all different perspective angles, and also focal length, like further away in a wide angle perspective, closer up to the crayfish, so we can have a look at all the details of its face and stuff. So that's quite important, that you do remember to capture a big variety of different shots so that you have flexibility in your editing. And here you can really use that flexibility by shuffling around and creating a sequence where you can then put a narration, if you want to, on top of it, and that will make sense. And then we get into the ending part, and here literally I wasn't really able to come up with a good transition, so I just ended up going into a fade to black and fade back in from black, from the last shot of the crayfish into the first shot of us going towards the exit and finishing our dive, meeting our little perch there, and then finishing the dive all together. So that's how I would go about creating these sequences and putting them together into an entire film. After having done this, and after you're happy with the sequencing that you've created, I would suggest you create a voiceover if that's something that you want to include in your film. It absolutely doesn't have to be, but it is an option. And if you want to include a voiceover, if you have some information that you want to share with the viewer in a voiceover way, then this is probably the best point within that process, the editing process, to include and add your voiceover. Simple reason is because we now know how long the edit is going to be, and we can lay out the storyline now, and we can basically just have it run as we record the voiceover, making sure that it's not too short, too long, and that we place the appropriate parts into the appropriate sections of our film. So after you've integrated your voiceover, the next step would be to integrate and create a sound design. And again, this is not a must by no means, but I would strongly recommend that you start looking into sound design, because it's going to give your videos just an extra dimension. Now I'll give you a quick idea of what my sound design looks like for this film. So this is basically all the sound effects and the sound design that I've put together. You can see there is some stuff that is internally in Final Cut Pro X, like some lake water sounds, some wind sounds that I'm using for the very beginning of the film, where there's no music, nothing. We just see the diver sitting on the shore looking out onto the lake. Then we have obviously some bubbles as we are descending down into the water and onto the dive, and this is actually the original sound that I've just extracted from the originally captured file. And then we have some sound effects. These sound effects, I've also gotten them from audio.com. They do also have a sound effects library, a catalog, not just music, but also sound effects, not in their basic subscriptions, not in the lifetime subscription, but in the audio professional subscription, you get access to these sound effects as well. And I find that they have a fairly large catalog there, ever expanding, and a lot of options for different sound designs that you can choose. For example, here at the right at the beginning, we have some of these where the diver moves his torch around the reef. I've used some of these sounds to emphasize that movement and the airy atmosphere a little more. Then we've got other sounds that I've used. This one here, for example, was used for the crayfish to emphasize the movements that they're making. Yeah, so you can see there's quite a few of these sound effects put together, and I just like to then put them together in a separate file and have that underlaid on the entire clip. Step number 8 then is to make sure that the levels of all the sound elements that you're using, music, voiceover, sound design, that they are kind of equalized to each another and that they work well together. So personally, what I try to do is have my sound design, let's just do the voiceover and the music, just deactivate that. And if we have, for example, just the sound design, and if we look over here at our volumes, the sound design is going to be somewhere between -30, -20 dB. That's where I try to keep my sound design normally. If we then deactivate the sound design and have a look at the music is normally a little less loud than the sound design, in my opinion. It should be. So it's normally just around the -30 dB mark. It pops up a little more than that in certain areas, but it's not really much more than that. And sometimes it just goes down as the narration kicks in. This is also just, made the adjustments there. So as the narration kicks in, this goes down, and as the narration stops, here our music gets louder, and here can be a little more prominent. But this is all manual adjustments. You can see all the manual adjustments there made throughout the whole music track, so that the music doesn't stay the same but changes the volume depending on what is happening in the film. And that can make a big effect actually on how the music is affecting the film and the mood of the film. And then we also have our voiceover, and with the voiceover I normally try to keep it somewhere between, sorry, I'll turn that off, otherwise you won't hear me, but I try to keep it somewhere between, that it peaks between -6 and like -3 dB. I try to not go much higher than that. This was a bit of an exception there. I was to -1, but normally it shouldn't really go that far up.
Da ist ganz nah an den Herren, sodass wir ihn in all seinen Facetten und Einzelheiten bewundern können.
But this is definitely something that you have to just try out a little bit and see how it fits best together. And once you've got all these levels sorted out, obviously just turn on everything and just listen, play it back and listen to all the sounds that you've got, and see if you can clearly understand your voiceover, and if the music is not, you know, overly loud and the sound effects are not being completely washed out and overwhelmed by the music. So try to find a nice balance. But these are just kind of general recommendations when it comes to the sound levels for each of these segments of your entire sound design, and everything that goes into music, sound and voice over there. So at this stage, you've got a pretty much finished movie, and the only thing, in my opinion, that you now need to consider and decide is whether or not you want to integrate and add some letterboxes, or a letterbox, I better say. A letterbox is these cinema bars at the bottom and the top of your frame, making it look like it is not in a 16:9 ratio, but much rather in a much wider image ratio. And this is gonna, well, people say this is gonna make it feel a little bit more cinematic and give it a bit more cinematic feel to it. I agree to this. It does feel a bit more cinematic to me that way as well. And that's why I like to include these cinema bars when I'm creating not YouTube content, but like films that I'm putting out and submitting to competitions and stuff. I like to integrate those cinema bars there. And last but not least, step number 10, you just want to do a final check by watching the entire film in your timeline again. I would also recommend that you do export your film and watch it on different devices. So maybe send it over to your smartphone, watch it on that screen as well. So because different screens will have different color rendering, so just make sure that it looks okay color-wise on a variety of different screens. And that's kind of your last step in that 10-step editing process that I recommend you do on every single film project that you work on. And there you have it. That's my 10-step editing process that I go through every time I work on a underwater film, or any film really in general. Hopefully this can be kind of a guideline for you as well, giving you some ideas on how you can go through your editing process of your next underwater film. Now, if today's video was useful to you, you got something out of it, you learned something, then please do hit that like button, and also consider subscribing to the channel so you're not missing out on any future content that will be uploaded here. Talking of future content, make sure to not miss out on next week's video, where we have a first look at the Insta360X3 that I had with me on our recent underwater videography workshop to Egypt, and I was able to collect some first experiences with that camera that I'm more than happy to share with you in next week's video. Have a great week, guys. Keep capturing your underwater adventures, and I will see you in the next one.